Hello, travelers. Thanks for stopping by this video. I hope you truly enjoy it. If you do, consider subscribing. There's plenty more history to uncover together. Also, let me know in the comments, what time of day is it for you right now? And where in the world are you watching from? I'm always curious about that. Now then, let's begin. The flames, the crowds, the names forgotten. We imagine the witch trials as singular events, women burning, smoke rising, prayers whispered under the sound of cracking wood. But the truth is quieter, more persistent, more ordinary. It wasn't one night of madness. It was centuries of fear, fear dressed as faith, violence disguised as virtue. Fear that lived not in sudden bursts, but in daily glances, subtle shifts, and careful silences. And at the center of it all was a woman, not a villain, not a sorceress, just a woman who didn't quite belong where obedience was survival. She may have sung too loudly, or walked too far without a man, or laughed at the wrong time, or asked a question when silence was expected. Before we meet her, before we walk beside her, we need to understand the world that built her pyre. This was Europe, from the late 1400s to the 1700s, a continent still reeling from the Black Death, still haunted by plague, scarred by war, burned by famine. The people were frightened. The church was powerful. And every illness, every crop failure, every stillborn child needed a reason. And that reason was often found in someone vulnerable. Sometimes that reason wore a face. A woman who lived alone, a midwife who knew too much about life, a widow who kept her husband's land, a mother who lost too many children and smiled too rarely, a healer with herbs in her pocket and no interest in confession. The fear was not of magic. It was of agency, of independence, of the quiet rebellion of survival. This was not about superstition alone. It was about control, social roles, gender expectations, power, and the fragile line between reverence and resentment. The word witch did not fall from the sky. It was sharpened over time by sermons, by scrolls, by inquisitions and local courts. In Germany, over 20,000 people, mostly women, were executed for witchcraft. The Holy Roman Empire held more documented trials than anywhere else in Europe. The accusations there were methodical, legalized, bureaucratic. Torture wasn't an anomaly. It was standard practice. It was procedure. It was recorded. In Scotland, the fear ran deep. A nation already shaped by violent clan politics, sudden shifts in power, and Calvinist extremism, it embraced witch hunts with ferocity. Here, the executions were public. Bodies were burned at the stake not just for punishment, but for example. The smoke was a lesson. The fire, a sermon. In France, Spain, and Italy, the Inquisition played a stronger role. But it wasn't always as brutal as imagined. In some cases, the Inquisition was more procedural, less chaotic, concerned with heresy over folk magic. Still, when the cross became political, mercy vanished quickly. Lines blurred, motives shifted, confessions were sculpted, not given. And then, across the Atlantic, a much smaller but more infamous echo. Salem, Massachusetts, 1692. 19 hanged, 1 pressed to death, more than 200 accused. A single Puritan village overtaken by fear, theology, and adolescent theatrics. Unlike Europe, there were no burnings in Salem, only ropes, but the fear felt familiar, the silence just as deep, the desperation just as loud. The fire had crossed the sea, and in the new world it found fresh timber. But tonight, our story isn't about all of them. It's about one of them. You are a woman. You live near the woods, but not in them. You grow thyme and lavender in your garden. You keep dried rosemary on the windowsill. Not for spells, but because your mother did. You were married once. He died. You didn't. You were asked to remarry. You declined. Now they say you're bitter, that your cat is too black, that your cooking smells wrong, that you don't attend church often enough, that you walk too slowly, that you speak too softly, or too plainly, or too much. You once told a young woman she didn't need to marry him. People heard. They remembered. No one knows exactly when it started. The whispers, the looks. Maybe it was after the child got sick, or when the crops turned yellow, or maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was only time. You weren't born to be a witch, but someone had to be. They call you the midwife, the widow, the strange one. At the market, people step aside. A boy throws a rock at your door. The priest pauses when he sees you on the path. A woman whose daughter died last week weeps when she sees you. She doesn't say your name, but she stops coming to your garden. Others follow. Your house grows quieter. Your world narrows. The birdsong outside your window sounds lonelier now. Even the soil seems hesitant. Even the wind feels like it's warning you. Until one morning, you hear boots on the path. Not footsteps, boots. The kind that carry judgment. You open the door. They do not ask your name. They already have it written down. This is how it begins. No screams, no spells, just silence, and a name someone whispered loud enough to be heard. A name no one will remember when it's all over. The journey that follows is not about truth. It's about submission. They take you to a stone building, or a wooden one, or a cellar that smells of mildew and salt. They don't hit you. Not yet. They ask questions first, questions they already believe they know the answers to. Do you know why you are here? Have you spoken to spirits? Has the devil appeared to you in dreams? You laugh. Only once, and they write that down, defiant, mocking. You cry, and they write that too, emotional, manipulative. You say nothing, and the parchment grows longer. You look at their faces, young, old. Some are afraid. Others eager. One looks away. That night you sleep on straw, or you don't sleep at all. You wonder if anyone will speak for you. The priest? Number. The woman you helped last winter? Number. The neighbor whose child you saved from fever? Number. You whisper your own name, just once. Just to remember what it sounds like. Silence is contagious. You realize this isn't a trial, it's a script, and your role is already cast. There's no end written for you, just a place to stand and burn. You think of running, but where? You think of confessing, but to what? You think of praying, but the only God who seems near is the one outside the door, sharpening a verdict. You are no longer a woman, you are a symbol, a vessel for other people's fear. You are not yourself. You are what they need you to be to sleep well tonight. You remember your mother's hands, the way she picked herbs, crushed garlic, rubbed balm on your chest when you coughed. You remember her words, be kind, be useful, but don't be seen too much. You tried. It wasn't enough. You close your eyes and picture her, just for a second. Her voice, her scent, the warmth of her embrace. She would not have survived this either. In the corner of the room, there is a mark on the wall, a scratch, a name, a date, maybe. You wonder if she was like you, if she screamed, if she confessed, if she believed until the end that someone would say, no, she's not a witch. No one did. And yet, maybe she left the mark. Maybe you will too. And so you wait, not for justice, for fire, for rope, for silence, and maybe, just maybe, for someone, someday, to whisper your name again and say it was not her fault. You are no longer waiting. The door opens. There is no announcement, no judgment declared, just hands. One to pull you forward, another to bind your wrists. The ropes feel like decisions already made, tight, coarse, deliberate. You realize even their knots are ritual, practiced and impersonal. You walk barefoot. The stones beneath your feet are cold, but familiar. They sting less than memory. You do not shiver. There's nothing left in you that flinches. You are beyond reflex, beyond surprise. You do not think of escape. You think of quiet, of stillness. Outside the sky is gray, not out of mourning, but indifference. The kind of gray that swallows time, makes it hard to tell morning from dusk. The crowd is already gathered. Some look at you, some look away. A few whisper. One laughs. That laugh is not cruel. It is nervous, human, but it cuts all the same. A reminder that laughter, too, can be a weapon. You do not recognize most of them, and yet they know you, or at least the version of you they need to believe in. A shadow, a rumor, a reason they can sleep at night. You see children held close to mothers, not out of protection, but participation. This is not a community watching. It is a performance in which everyone has their part. You are made to kneel, not as prayer, as spectacle, as theater. The platform is raised, the silence purposeful. The magistrate reads, his voice steady, rehearsed. The charges blur together, consorting with spirits, cursing livestock, seducing men in their sleep, dancing under the moon, spitting on the cross, speaking to a bird, collecting rainwater without permission, owning too many books, living alone, asking questions. You wonder which one sealed your fate, or if it was the silence between them that mattered more. The part where your eyes lingered too long, where you didn't apologize, where you didn't break. Or maybe it was all of them, not the acts themselves, but the audacity to carry them without shame. They offer you a final word. You decline. Words have already been used against you. You were never heard. Why start now? Silence, in this moment, is your final act of control. They call it mercy, the way they bind your ankles with damp rope so the flames will take slower. They say it with straight faces, with voices trained to sound official. But mercy has never looked like this. It is not wet rope that saves, only delays. They call it justice, the way the crowd murmurs, not in anger, but in relief, not because they hate you, but because they are grateful it's not them. The ritual is reassurance, a cleansing, a declaration that the world is now safe again. They call it holy, the way the priest recites Psalm 140, eyes closed, lips tight. He says he is protecting the town. He never once says your name. His prayers are not for you, but against you. You call it quiet. And in that quiet, the fire is lit. It does not roar, it whispers. At first, just smoke, then heat, then pain. It coils upward, a soft hiss at first, before it begins to breathe. The crackling is not loud. It sounds almost natural, like leaves in autumn. But it is not nature, it is choice. But you do not scream, not because you are brave, but because the fire steals the breath before the voice. Because you know screaming won't save you. Because you no longer care to be heard. Because the fire in some way has always been coming. And as your skin blisters, as your bones crack, as your body twists away from itself, you remember a song, one your mother sang. Just a hum, nothing more. It was about the river or the stars or nothing at all. A lullaby that outlived her. It stays with you, even as your name does not, even as your face becomes smoke, even as your memories begin to unravel into ash. The hum drifts upward, caught between breath and flame. It is your legacy now. When it ends, the ash is swept away, the wood cleared, the air forgets. But the scent lingers, not on the wind, but in the silences people leave behind when they mention your name, or choose not to. The silence is its own grave. But elsewhere, a village in Scotland, a chapel in France, a field in Poland, a colony in New England. Another woman is taken. Her hands are bound. Her name is whispered. Her trial already decided. Her neighbors avert their gaze. The ritual repeats. The smoke rises. The silence deepens. The pages fill with new accusations. The crowd gathers again. New faces. Same fear. The machinery continues. Unquestioned. Oiled by tradition and belief. In Salem they hang you instead. Simpler. Quicker. The rope doesn't burn. It breaks. The neck snaps, or it doesn't. Some twitch, some swing. All are forgotten. But for a moment before the drop, you look into the sky and you wonder what your mother would say. You are still accused by neighbors, by children, by the ones who once held your hand. A child you once cradled points at you. A man you once fed prays against you. A friend you once saved looks away. Love does not shield. It only hesitates. You are still condemned without proof, punished without mercy, erased without regret. You are a page turned in a book no one finishes reading. Your name becomes smudged. Your face a lesson. Your memory a caution. But in Salem, the gallows creak instead of flames. 19 bodies in a row, one pressed beneath stone, fingers shattered, chest collapsed. A man who said until the end, "More weight." His silence, too, was a sentence. His body, a monument. His words, a verdict. They built no statue for him, but they remember. In every country, every trial, every story, the methods differ. But the fear always speaks the same language. It speaks in whispers, in glances, in laws passed to protect morality, in sermons that promise purity through persecution. It disguises itself as protection, as righteousness, as order. It moves through history wearing different faces, but always the same voice. The women change, the towns change, the tools change, but the fire remains. Not always literal, sometimes colder, sometimes slower, sometimes made of paper, not flame. Sometimes it's a job denied, a rumor spread, a door left unopened, a voice dismissed, but always burning. In minds, in laws, in silence. And yet, you endured. Even now, long after the ashes have faded, your story lingers, not in records, but in echoes, in the way some women lower their voices, in the way some names disappear, in the hush before certain questions are asked. You, and the hundreds like you, became more than victims. You became questions, mirrors, lessons, a legacy of warnings carved into air. Your suffering did not vanish. It grew roots. It spread. You became a name scratched in stone, a silence someone noticed, a story someone couldn't forget. You became a shadow cast across generations, a reminder that silence is not peace, that obedience is not virtue. Perhaps that's why we still whisper about you, not out of fear, but out of shame. Because deep down, we know it wasn't the devil they feared. It was the truth in your eyes, the strength in your spine, the refusal to bend, because you never asked for fire. And we never asked who lit the match. Now we must. There is no afterlife for ashes, but stories live differently. Long after the flames die, long after the gallows rot, the silence remains. It folds itself into books and laws and unspoken customs. It walks beside women as they cross streets. It lingers in boardrooms and bedrooms and sanctuaries. It breathes through glances exchanged across dinner tables. It moves through generations, unspoken but deeply understood. It stains memories, reshapes narratives, and hovers in the pauses between conversations. It slips between the lines of forgotten history. It hums under the breath of every woman who ever chose not to speak, or chose to speak anyway. It nestles in the corners of libraries, in the pauses of sermons, in the margins of family trees, in the rustle of dresses passed down without explanation, not as fire, but as memory. And in that memory, you live, not whole, not clear, but real, tangled in myth, draped in whispers, rewritten again and again, yet still holding something true at the center. You become legend not because of who you were, but because of what they tried to erase. They made you faceless to make you less, but it only made your echo louder. You become the story mothers hesitate to tell and daughters quietly seek. A flicker, a warning, a guide. You are not a ghost. You are a question, a breath held in history's throat,
a mark left behind when everything else has faded, a hush that enters the room just before someone speaks too boldly, a flicker in the eye of a girl who knows she will be punished for being right, a name never written, but always known. Were you guilty? No, but you were inconvenient. You were a problem without a solution, a reminder of everything they could not control, a boundary they could not redraw, a silence they could not own. Did you curse them? No, but you frightened them with your silence, your persistence, your refusal to yield, your quiet certainty, your presence unashamed. Did you survive? Not then, but in another sense, always, because surviving is not always breath. Sometimes it is the refusal to be forgotten. Sometimes it's the power of being remembered for the wrong reasons and redefined by the right ones. Sometimes it is the voice that rises long after the speaker is gone. And sometimes it is the knowing glance exchanged between two women who have never met but understand everything. Because now we ask. We ask what it meant to be feared for thinking, for healing, for refusing, for walking away, for speaking when silence was demanded, for standing when kneeling was expected, for laughing too loudly, for aging without permission, for dreaming outside the script, for daring to live without needing to explain, for existing unapologetically. We ask why women who spoke too clearly, loved too freely, lived too boldly, became firewood, why their wisdom was called poison, why their solitude was labeled secrecy, why their strength was rewritten as threat, why their questions were answered with flames, why their joy was made suspect, why their pain was never believed, why their truth was only considered when spoken by others. We ask what kind of world needs witches to feel pure. What kind of world builds its peace upon ashes? What kind of purity demands that the wild be tamed and the unknown be punished? What kind of legacy grows from fear masquerading as righteousness? What kind of faith is built on obedience alone? And in that asking, you return, not as smoke, but as voice, as presence, as pulse, as haunting and hope all at once, as the breeze that unsettles the curtain, as the chill that stills the room. You are the woman who would not bow, the woman who was too much, the woman who was just enough to make them uneasy, the woman whose silence was not submission, but steel, the woman who whispered to herself when no one else listened, the woman who held her ground, even as the fire rose, the woman who saw the truth and said it anyway. You are the one who hummed as the fire rose. You are the silence they could not silence. You are the echo in every courtroom, every classroom, every quiet moment when a girl decides to speak. You are the hesitation in a judge's hand, the breath a teacher takes before naming something inconvenient, the chill in the air when old power senses it is being watched, the tremor that follows truth, the stones skipped across centuries, and now we carry your story in poems, in protests, in lullabies, in conversations whispered between generations, in stories that begin with, "She dared," in every place where someone speaks up and someone else listens, in every pair of eyes that refuses to look away, in songs written in minor keys, in the hands that do not tremble. We speak your name even if we do not know it. We remember your hands Even if we never saw them, we inherit your defiance. Even if we do not understand its shape, we follow your footprints, even when the trail is covered in time. We guard your memory like fire in a dry field, cautious, sacred, alive. We shape your silence into syllables. We speak because you could not. We shout because you whispered. You are not buried. You are seated. You did not die. You were planted. And from that soil, something unexpected grew. From that soil, thousands bloomed, each carrying your refusal, each one carrying a spark, each one refusing the script, each one a continuation. And you are growing in every girl who questions the rules, in every mother who teaches her daughter to think, in every stranger who dares to say, not again, in every laugh that should not have been laughed, in every step taken where none were allowed, in every choice made without apology, in every boundary redrawn, in every voice that cracks but still continues, in every witness who refuses to be quiet, in every act of rebellion that begins with, I remember, in every heart that trembles and still speaks, in every room where truth is unwelcome but enters anyway. The fire tried to end you, but it made you eternal, because from flame some things don't burn, they forge. And what emerges from that forge does not ask permission. It remembers. It burns brighter, not in destruction, but in defiance, in clarity, in truth. It walks through the fire and does not flinch. It speaks in many tongues. It looks like courage. It sounds like legacy. So tonight we speak of witches not as evil, but as echo, not as danger, but as warning, not as monsters, but as mirrors, mirrors that refuse to lie, mirrors that remember, mirrors that reflect back everything the world tried to hide, mirrors that show us not just who they feared, but who we still might become, mirrors that ask, if it was you, would you have spoken? Would you have stood? Would you have run? Would you have watched? And as we sleep, your memory watches, not to haunt, but to guard. Not with vengeance, but with witness, with clarity, with steadiness, with patience. Because what was burned was not just a woman, it was a future, a lineage, an entire forest of voices unspoken. It was every daughter not born, every word not written, every dream never dared, every page torn out, every truth delayed, every mother made to disappear, every silence inherited. And what remains is a promise that next time the fire will not consume her. It will surround her, and she will walk through it, untouched, and we will walk with her. We will carry her name. We will gather her ashes and draw maps. We will build from what was taken. We will light our candles from the coals. We will make altars of memory, bridges of silence, voices out of ash. We will write her name in the sky. We will hold the line she once held alone. And we will say, you were not lost. You were sent ahead. You did not vanish. You cleared the way. And we remember the way. And we are coming. We are many. And we are not afraid. We are the daughters of those who survived. We are the continuation of what could not be stopped. History doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers and waits to see who's still listening. Not every atrocity echoes through time with a scream. Some settle quietly into the walls, into the dust, into the spaces between laws and customs and habits. Some hide in plain sight, softened by modernity, disguised by manners, spoken through institutions. Some become traditions too familiar to question, too embedded to name, too polished to fear. The fires may have gone out, the ropes may have frayed, the gallows dismantled, the tribunals dissolved, but what they stood for lingers, hidden beneath new names, veiled by civility, reshaped by time. It waits, not in the darkness, but in the light, dressed in professionalism, cloaked in politeness, hidden in bureaucracy. It changes masks, but never disappears. It speaks now through policy memos and workplace culture. It hides behind passive language and weaponized etiquette. It settles into email chains and hiring panels. It hides in the margins of meeting notes and syllabi. It lives in the phrasing of job descriptions, in the hush of boardrooms, in the way credit is distributed and doors are closed. Witch hunts did not end. They changed clothes. Today they wear headlines. They wear smiles that don't reach the eyes. They wear polite refusals and closed doors. They wear performance reviews and lowered voices. They wear silence in meetings and laughter that isn't quite right. They wear laws that pretend to protect but draw invisible lines. They wear schools that teach half of what was true and none of what hurt. They wear expectations stitched into dress codes and unwritten rules. They wear corporate diversity statements that never speak beyond the surface. They wear empty gestures framed as progress. They wear judgment disguised as advice. They wear questions like, "Are you sure you're qualified?" They wear compliments laced with warning. They wear curiosity that smells like scrutiny. They wear concern that tastes like control. They wear mentorship that comes with strings attached and guidance that walks just a little too far into condescension. They offer a seat at the table while tightening the screws under it. And the women? They are still learning how to navigate rooms built to unmake them, still walking tightropes of tone and timing, still shrinking to fit the frame, still smoothing their edges for comfort, still apologizing for taking up space, still weighing every word before it's spoken, every gesture before it's made, still negotiating their worth in currencies no one else is asked to use, still translating their power into something less threatening just to be heard, still being told their truth is inconvenient, their memory inaccurate, their voice too sharp, still asking, gently or not, why is this the rule? Still punished for the question more than for any answer. Still learning how to speak without being labeled, how to lead without being feared, how to exist without explanation, how to breathe without being interpreted, how to say yes with boundaries and no without guilt, how to claim space without apology, how to heal without permission. The centuries between us and the stake are not as wide as they seem. The wood is gone, but the heat remains. The executioner wears a lanyard now. The flames are in the eyes of those who do not listen. The noose has been replaced with metrics, the torch with social exclusion, the dungeon with a desk, the gallows with policy, the mob with performance feedback. The judgment now comes typed, approved, and archived. You no longer burn, but you are still judged. You are not hanged, but you are still hung out. You are not drowned, but your voice is still buried under the weight of too much, too loud, too smart, too emotional, too plain, too proud, too quiet, too fast, too slow, too everything, too alive, too human, too unlikable in ways no one can explain, too visible, too different, too unyielding, too intuitive, too bold, too tired to smile and too awake to forget. And still, you rise. You rise because there is no other way. You rise because others cannot. You rise because fire taught you how to be flame without smoke, because silence taught you how to make sound feel sacred, because history taught you that survival is sometimes the loudest kind of defiance, because the ones before you left maps in the ashes, because you learned to trace their footsteps without needing their names. Witches now do not wear pointed hats. They wear their scars, their stubbornness, their unreadable expressions, their exhaustion, their laughter that does not ask permission. They wear comfortable shoes and old books and silence that pierces. They wear rings passed down by grandmothers. They wear playlists instead of potions. They wear grief and anger and wisdom and joy, sometimes all at once. They wear keys to rooms that never existed before them. They wear tattoos like spells, rituals written in ink. They wear songs as armor and memory as a compass. They meet in cafes, in chat rooms, in quiet glances exchanged across subway seats, in study circles, in online comments, in parks and shelters and basements where no one thought power could live. They find each other in questions, not answers. They find each other in pauses, in rituals, in the quiet resistance of choosing to stay. They find one another across oceans and generations, speaking in shared silences. They do not always agree, but they always recognize each other. They do not cast spells, they cast votes. They raise children. They raise standards. They raise their hands when others are afraid to. They raise questions that shift the room. They raise eyebrows, voices, and expectations. They raise flags. They raise each other. They raise the ceiling for those who come next. They raise hell when needed, and gardens when it's safe. And still, the world flinches. It flinches not because witches are dangerous, but because they remember what happened the last time they weren't believed. Because they know fire can return in any form. Because deep down, the world knows it owes them more than fear. It owes them truth. It owes them change. And that debt weighs heavier than any rope. It flinches because it sees itself reflected and doesn't like what it sees. It fears the reckoning, the remembering, the rewriting of what it thought was settled. The same fear that once lit torches now dims lights in conference rooms. It signs anonymous complaints. It rolls its eyes and says, "She's difficult." It avoids eye contact. It deletes emails. It changes the subject. It leaves early. It makes space only when forced. It smiles at your face and closes the door behind your back. It apologizes for you before you speak. It rewards silence and punishes memory. It prefers comfort to clarity. But this is not the same world. Because now we know the shape of silence. We know the rhythm of avoidance. We know the taste of injustice. And we know how to speak. We know how to write it down. We know how to record it. We know how to show up for each other. We know how to hold the line. We know that holding space is as powerful as holding power. We know that saying no is its own kind of anthem. We know the difference between compliance and peace. We know how to fight without burning. We know how to build while they still dismantle. We know how to carry fire in our pockets without setting the room ablaze. So when they say, "Witches are gone," smile, because you know they never left. They were waiting. They were growing. They were writing. They were watching. They were whispering names in the dark. They were weaving futures in their sleep. They were braiding spells into lullabies and protest chants. They were keeping the fire not to burn, but to remember. They were keeping each other alive in fragments and songs. They were building temples in notebooks and rebellions out of breath. And they are not alone anymore. They walk in pairs now, in groups, in movements, in stories, in rituals that begin with, "I see you," in movements that say, "We believe you," in language reclaimed, in power shared, in silence that has learned to speak. They carry their ancestors with them, and they are not afraid, because they've already seen the fire, and they are still here, because we are all still here, building a world where no one has to burn to be heard, where legacy is louder than fear, where witches write history, not footnotes, where their names are no longer forgotten, but spoken with reverence and rage, where every whisper becomes a wind, where no one stands alone again. What remains when fear fades? Not because it has been defeated, but because it has been replaced with something quieter, more patient, more enduring. The world does not always heal from fire. Sometimes it simply learns how to walk around the burn marks. Sometimes it forgets to ask where the scars came from. Or worse, it learns to call the scars natural. After the ashes settle, life pretends to go on. New names are etched where old ones were erased. New rules are drawn in the space where justice never arrived. New buildings rise on top of forgotten graves. New stories are told to cover the sound of old ones scratching at the floorboards. And in the corners of this new world, another story begins. Not a story of fire, but of frost. Not immediate terror, but lingering suspicion. Not violence, but bureaucracy. Not trials, but traditions. After the witch trials, the villages did not apologize. They reorganized. They cleaned the public square. They restored the chapel. They recast the bell. They redrew the maps to make the pain less visible. They named streets after saints, never after the silenced. They held meetings. They adjusted the ledgers. They blessed the ground, not because it was sacred, but because it was convenient. They prayed not for the dead, but for order. They taught children not to ask questions. They praised obedience as virtue. They added footnotes to their history books. They turned victims into warnings. They sanitized the records and archived the rest. They taught the next generation how to speak carefully and how not to remember too much. And the women? They learned a different kind of silence. Not the silence of terror, but the silence of understanding. The silence that knows it will not be believed. the silence that knows it must find another way. The silence passed down through lullabies and gestures. They planted herbs in hidden gardens. They kept journals in locked drawers. They folded their prayers into soup and lullabies. They taught their daughters to listen with more than their ears. They told stories only at night, only in whispers, only in pieces. They pressed their histories into embroidery. They carried memory in the way they walked. They stopped using the word witch, not because it had lost meaning, but because it had been stolen, twisted, turned against them, marketed, demonized, flattened. They stopped claiming titles. They started making maps, maps of survival, maps of lineage, maps of memory, maps of danger zones. This village, that surname, this particular church door. Because after fire comes forgetting. And forgetting is the most dangerous kind of magic. It doesn't burn. It erases. It doesn't strike. It rewrites. It makes villains of the brave and saints of the cruel. It canonizes the silence and questions the scream. It turns warnings into myths. It makes cruelty look like caution. It makes the witch trial a misunderstanding. It makes the pyre a necessary measure. It makes the executioner a man doing his job. It makes the victim a shadow. And shadows do not get stories. They get warnings. They get edited out, but not forever, because history is patient. It loops. It mutters. It waits for an echo. It leaves threads, small ones, for those who know how to pull. And eventually, someone always asks, what really happened? That question alone is enough to crack open the silence, enough to send dust flying off archives, enough to make the descendants remember what the ancestors tried to bury, enough to disturb even the most settled graves. It begins with questions. It always does. Why did they accuse her? Why did no one stop it? Why was fear stronger than reason? Why did they burn her? And why did everyone watch? Why was the crowd silent? Why were the neighbors complicit? Why did no one speak her name? Why was her daughter never allowed to speak of her again? And once the name is spoken, once the silence is punctured, memory returns with teeth. It bites into the present. It forces the reckoning. It rises through generations like smoke through floorboards. Because the legacy of the witch trials isn't just death. It's distortion. It's fear turned into folklore. It's justice rewritten by power. It's culture shaped by who gets to tell the story. It's trauma dressed as tradition. And we are the ones telling it now. We, the daughters of those not believed. We, the inheritors of interruption. We, the gatherers of fragments. We, who learn to read between erased lines. We speak the names. We light the candles. We hold the questions like lanterns. We do not run from the fire, we carry it. And in that fire, we see the truth. She wasn't a witch, she was a mirror. And they broke her because they didn't like what they saw. They feared her because she remembered. They destroyed her because she reflected something they wanted to forget. So we rebuild. We restore her image, not the one they painted, but the one she carried. We write her story, not their version. We call her by her real name, not the one chanted by the mob. We remember that she laughed, that she cooked with her sleeves rolled up, that she sang off key, that she fought when no one else did, that she cried and still stood tall, that she loved and still wasn't spared. We remember the humanity they stripped. We put it back, carefully, tenderly, word by word, memory by memory. We teach it to our children. We tell them witches were never evil, that fire was never holy, that fear is not a virtue, that silence is not safety, that being right is not always enough, that being loud is sometimes necessary. We teach them to ask questions, even the ones that make the room quiet, especially those. We give them the tools to dig, to remember, to resist, to rebuild, to listen. And when they ask, "But why did they do it?" we do not say, "It was a different time." We say, "Because fear often wins," until someone tells the truth. And the truth is this: she deserved better. She deserved more. She deserved justice. She deserved to age, to write, to dance, to be tired, to be wrong, to be alive. And if she could not have it then, we will build it now. For her, for us. For every woman who was named dangerous for daring to live fully. For every girl told to shrink. For every whisper that never became a word. Because the story doesn't end at the pyre. It ends when we make sure it never happens again, and begins every time we choose to remember. This is not just a history, it is a call, a chant, a circle, drawn in flame and ink and blood and song, a wound reopened so it can finally heal, a reckoning without rage, but not without fire. It is not over. It is never over, because memory has no deadline, because truth does not expire. And in that never-ending, she lives, not just remembered, but restored, not as myth, but as meaning, not in fear, but in fire. And this time, we're watching, we're recording, we're writing it down. We're building a fire no one can snuff out. Not for punishment, but for light. Not for vengeance, but for witness. This time, we remember everything. Where does justice go when it's been denied for so long that people stop looking? Does it disappear, or does it change shape, become art or anger, or a silence so loud it makes people uncomfortable? Or does it wait, patient, invisible, buried in songs and rituals and the words we whisper only to ourselves? Justice, real justice, isn't loud. It isn't always a headline or a ruling. Sometimes it's a decision whispered through generations, that what happened will not happen again, that we will carry the names, that we will name what others were forced to forget. The legacy of the witch trials is not only found in the names etched into forgotten stones, it's embedded in the muscles of memory, in how women sit, speak, hesitate, and sometimes choose not to speak at all. It lives in the quiet avoidance of eye contact, in the sidestep from authority, in the default apology before a sentence even begins. It hums in the pauses of conversation, in the reluctance to raise a hand, in the flinch when attention is turned. And this is where the long shadow settles, not in fire, but in form, in the rules we follow without remembering who made them, in the behaviors inherited not through biology, but through fear, in what is taught by silence, in the caution passed from mother to daughter, not as paranoia, but as preparation. There is a kind of education passed down through generations that has nothing to do with books. It's the education of survival, of who gets punished for being heard, of who gets erased for asking questions, of how danger doesn't always wear chains. Sometimes it wears tradition. Sometimes it wears a smile. Sometimes it bakes bread and sits at the head of the table. Some traditions survive because they're beautiful. Others survive because they're useful to power. The world after fire is a world that pretends it's safe. But safety built on forgetting is only a performance. It is a house built on the bones of women who were never meant to be remembered. And every time we say, it was a different time, we hang another curtain over the gallows. The daughters of the burned didn't inherit power. They inherited vigilance. They inherited the art of measuring a room, of knowing when to speak and when to disappear, of carrying the weight of memory without the luxury of clarity. They grew up watching how their mothers navigated rooms, how they softened their words, how they avoided conflict to keep peace, and how peace never kept them safe. They noticed the way voices dipped when certain names were spoken, the way eyes darted away when stories got too close to something true, the way family trees skipped certain branches. They learned to smile in a way that didn't invite questioning, to speak in tones that calmed, not challenged, to nod even when they disagreed, because disagreement could cost more than just a conversation. It could cost a reputation, a future, a place at the table. They became fluent in the unspoken, and in that fluency, they became powerful in ways the world couldn't measure. But that power came with silence. It came with a history hidden in kitchens and corners. It came with the ache of not being able to say what they remembered, of carrying names they were never allowed to speak aloud. And the men, some of them forgot, and some of them remembered, but quietly, because remembering meant recognizing complicity. And complicity has a way of turning truth into discomfort, into deflection, into dismissal. But not all turned away. Some listened. Some changed. Some handed their microphones to voices that had been silenced. Some stood between flames and the next woman. Some stayed when it got uncomfortable and grew. And some became bridges, carrying memory forward, not as guilt, but as responsibility. Because justice, when it returns, doesn't always arrive with vengeance. Sometimes it comes with a pen. Sometimes it comes as a question. Sometimes it comes in the form of a name finally spoken out loud. Sometimes it arrives through acknowledgement, through sitting in the discomfort long enough to see clearly. And justice never travels alone. It brings accountability. It brings grief. It brings reckoning. But it also brings possibility. Possibility for new systems, new stories, new traditions born from clarity rather than fear. Because once the fire burns everything, what's left is foundation, a bare space, a beginning. And from foundation you can build, not what was, but what should have been. what still could be. You can build stories that don't end in silence, homes where voices are welcome, laws that don't depend on fear, communities that remember without shame, systems that recognize harm before it turns to flame. You can plant gardens on graveyards, not to cover the past, but to nourish from it, to let what once was death feed something alive, to make beauty out of memory, because memory is not just a mirror, it's a seed, it's a responsibility, it's a kind of protest, and what we choose to grow from it, that's our power. That's our proof that we did not forget, that we did not let the silence win. The question is not just, what happened to the witches? It's, what happens now that we remember? What do we build from the ashes? What do we tell our children? What do we refuse to repeat? And the answer cannot be silence. It must be language, and image, and ritual, and breath, and laughter, and refusal, and community. It must be stories told at dinner tables, books that name names, art that disturbs and heals, songs that refuse to be censored, movements that grow like roots, slow, quiet, unstoppable. It must be children raised to question authority, lovingly. It must be classrooms where why is the first word, not the last. It must be faith that does not flinch from history. It must be justice that understands fire and still chooses water. Justice that chooses the long path over the easy burn. Justice that doesn't pretend forgetting is healing. And above all, it must be a world where no one burns for being, where difference is not a threat, where grief is not a weakness, where courage is not punished, where memory is sacred, where justice is not performance, but practice. This block, this moment, this breath is not the end of the story. It is the quiet before the rebuild. It is the inhale before the first new word. It is the space where grief becomes design, where rage becomes roadmap, where ashes become blueprint, where memory becomes mortar. It is where the witches rise, not from the grave, but from memory, not for revenge, but for truth, for healing, for witness, for the ones who come next. And truth always changes everything. Because when we speak it, we are no longer alone. We are in the company of every woman who ever stood in the fire, and everyone who refused to look away. And together, we write something new. Not all fires are extinguished. Some are simply buried beneath marble floors and manicured parks. Some flicker behind stained glass windows. Some burn in the pauses between questions never asked. And some, quieter than breath, glow faintly in forgotten places. Church basements, library archives, the quiet corners of minds that dare to remember. Fires that once roared now settle into the bones of our language, the habits of our eyes, the shapes of our shame. They shift into gestures, into hesitations, into laws never questioned but always obeyed. The legacy of those trials, of fear turned into ritual, of silence elevated to virtue, didn't just shape the world. It carved it into parchment, and parchment became law, into sermons that became dogma, into glances that became warnings, into lullabies that warned of stepping out of line, into textbooks that skipped the ugly parts. And in its stone, It left lessons most have forgotten how to read. Lessons not written in ink, but in absence, in omissions, in the names not spoken, in the graves not marked, in the apologies never given, in the assumptions never challenged. But the signs remain. They shimmer beneath the surface. They slip through casual conversation. They dress in politeness. They hide in curricula. They decorate boardrooms. They haunt confessionals. They tighten throats during interviews. They echo in jokes disguised as tradition. They are in our furniture, our metaphors, our folklore. They are polite ghosts, quiet, effective, unseen. In institutions that still distrust the outspoken, in laws that echo the logic of purity, in whispers that follow women who do not apologize, in jokes told to shame, in traditions kept only because they are old, in roles still defined by who is expected to stay quiet, in careers lost to discomfort, in diagnoses assigned to defiance, in scripts that demand compliance to appear respectable, in narratives that reward invisibility over truth. History, unacknowledged, does not stay in the past. It resurfaces, wearing new clothes, using new tools, speaking softer, but cutting just as deep. It smiles now. It markets itself. It claims neutrality while hiding the same old blade beneath velvet. It rewrites itself into entertainment, into costume, into folklore, but it never forgets its roots. It waits for silence. It thrives on forgetfulness. It blossoms when we call it history instead of warning. We still judge those who heal unconventionally. Herbalists rebranded as wellness influencers, but watched with suspicion all the same. We still mistrust emotion when it isn't neatly packaged. We still punish intuition when it cannot be footnoted. We still ask survivors to speak politely, to be composed, to educate us gently while bleeding. We still mistake fury for instability, still confuse softness for permission. We still fear those who do not conform, not just politically, but spiritually, stylistically, socially, and we still look for reasons to burn, even if we no longer use matches. Now we cancel, we exile digitally, we smear and silence. We don't gather in public squares. We scroll, we share, we pile on. Our gallows are digital, but the rituals feel familiar. Our fear wears avatars. Our condemnation travels faster, lands harder, and leaves no ashes, only silence. The witch trials did not end. They evolved, from pyres to pixels, from rope to rumor, from public squares to comment sections, from gallows to algorithms, from courts to culture wars, from torch-bearing mobs to monetized outrage. And the question remains, what are we willing to see? Are we brave enough to recognize the rituals we've inherited, the reflexes we've been taught, the scapegoats we still create, the patterns we repeat without question, the words we use without knowing their weight, the icons we raise and the voices we erase? Because when we talk of witches, we are not talking about myth. We are talking about systems. We are talking about choices. We are talking about now. We are talking about the fear that still governs who gets to speak and who pays the price for being heard. We are talking about you, about me, about who is still safe and why, about what fire looks like when no one is holding the match, and yet the burning never stops. So if you're still here, still listening, thank you. You've just walked through centuries, through ash and archive, through voices buried and voices reclaimed, through silences that screamed louder than words, through wounds that time did not close, only covered, through landscapes scorched and rebuilt, through whispers once punished, now softly spoken again, through shadows that clung to the hems of history, and through the echoes that refused to fade. And now we pause to remember not just the women who burned, but the ones who survived in silence, to grieve not only the trials, but the forgetting that followed, to speak not for the dead, but with them, to hold space for what was lost and what was never allowed to bloom, to cradle the names that history tried to erase and breathe life into stories that deserve to be heard, to honor the bravery it took to survive unnoticed, unrecorded, and unthanked. They are not gone. They echo in our questions. They live in our refusal. They endure in every word that reaches past erasure. They breathe in the moments when someone chooses to tell the story again. They linger in ink and image, in ritual and resistance. They move through us, in every act of courage, every choice to speak, every truth whispered across generations. They rise in our anger, our art, our quiet defiance. They appear in the hands that write, in the feet that march, in the voices that tremble but do not stop. Let this not be the end of a video. Let it be the beginning of a memory that doesn't fade. Let it be the stone that starts a ripple. Let it be the story you share with someone else, softly, honestly, bravely. Let it be the mirror that reflects not just what happened, but what still can change. Let it be the seed planted in soil once salted with shame, growing wild and wide in defiance. If you're watching in darkness, may it be a gentle one. If you're watching before sleep, carry this story into your dreams and wake with questions. If you feel haunted, that's not a ghost. That's history whispering, "Remember me." And maybe in remembering, we begin to heal. Maybe in witnessing, we rewrite the ending. Maybe in listening, we speak for those who never could. Maybe in telling, we become the bridge between silence and song. Maybe in naming, we break the last spell cast by forgetting. Good night. And do not forget, not the names, not the stories, not the silence they endured so we could speak, not the flames, but the sparks that remain, not the pain, but the strength it revealed, not the end, but the legacy now carried in you, not the shadows, but the light they dared to create, even as they were consumed.